tell apart a marine pest from an endemic species? If not, what if I were to tell you that the negative impact of marine pests can be just as detrimental as ocean pollution or climate change? In this video, I'm sharing the recording of a really important talk recently held by Coastcare and Agriculture Victoria, where they talk a bit more about what marine pests are, how to identify them, and what we as snorkelers and scuba divers can do to help.
My name's Richard Stafford-Bell. We're going to give a bit of a spiel about marine biosecurity. What are some of the pests that we're looking out for? How do they get here? How can we sort of control them? What are some of the things that we're worried about? So we work in Agriculture Victoria, which is a little bit weird, but we work in the marine biosecurity space. We have a statewide role. We look, we set up surveillance programs at our commercial ports. We work with community group members, so things like Northern Pacific sea star removal events. We get in touch with the likes of Earthcare St Kilda, which is that way, Port Phillip Eco Centre, all those sort of things. We do a lot of sort of research and development, a lot of communication and education sort of materials, and we represent Victoria on national committees for marine biosecurity. So marine pests, generally they're sort of plants, animals or algae that have hitchhiked a ride from other parts of the world, and they've turned up here mainly on the big commercial vessels that we get that come into Victoria. So Port of Melbourne, which is just up to our north, is Australasia's biggest containerised port. They get about 3,000 vessels, more than 3,000 vessels in every year. To give you a bit of an idea about the scale of that, our sort of second largest one, which would probably be Western Port, they'd be lucky to get 1,000 vessels every year. So one port in Victoria is getting 3 times as many as their second largest port. So our pest species can either come as larvae in ballast water. So ballast water is the water that a vessel will take on board to maintain sort of stability when it's operating. Generally what will happen is it'll be full of ballast water. When it comes into port and they start loading cargo onto it, if they keep the ballast water in there, the boat will basically just sort of tip over. So as the cargo is coming in and the vessel's getting heavier, excuse me, they pump out the water. So then the vessel will sit right. When they pump out the water, we've had species like the Northern Pacific sea star, which I'm sure you probably all know about, and I can hand around some pictures for you. So the Northern Pacific sea star, that turned up in ballast water. That originally arrived in Tasmania in sort of the mid-80s, about 1986. We found it here in Victoria in 1995. They attempted an eradication program, but by the year 2000, they reckon that there was about 165 million of them in Port Phillip Bay. So the females of this species produce between 5 and 20 million eggs every season. They have these mass spawning aggregations, particularly during the colder months. So they'll actually come into the shallow water. You'll see these big piles of sea stars, mass spawning, and you get massive population explosions basically. They're a significant predator. So they basically, every sea star will eat at least one mussel every day. So if you've got 165 million mouths to feed, that's a lot of native species being knocked on the head, basically. They compete, obviously, for space. They push out our native 11 arms, sea stars, those sort of things. They are reasonably confined to Port Phillip Bay. They have popped up in like Tidal River and the Gippsland Lakes in the past, and in Inverloch, they actually found them in Inverloch, but they've all been removed. So we haven't actually got any sort of established populations anywhere else except for Port Phillip Bay, which is interesting because the larvae of the species can absolutely pour out of the heads on any given time. We're not entirely sure why they haven't actually established a population outside of the bay. So it's a good thing. Pretty much what we do for that species in Victoria is we work with community groups who are really interested. People want to get in, remove and do their bit. The start of last year, Earthcare St Kilda I think it was like from January to March or something, they pulled 100,000 of them out. Around this part of the world actually, so Seaford, Carrum, Frankston, this area we seem to get these mass aggregations every few years. So in 2018 we had a massive one. This year we had hundreds of thousands of them along the beach. So Earthcare St Kilda jumped in and removed them all, which was absolutely fantastic. The other way that things can get here is as a biofouling species. So that's a species that will grow on the bottom of a boat on the other side of the world or wherever it might have come from. It'll turn up here, it'll find a nice place to spawn, and it will sort of establish into a new population. So things like, these are some of the mussels that we're sort of concerned about. So these are our native mussels. These are the native blue mussels. These are actually shells, these ones. We got these made up just for exactly these purposes, a bit of comms and engagement type stuff. The one that Jack has got is the New Zealand green lip mussel. So that is obviously from New Zealand. It's great to eat. you can't get them here in Australia unless they're frozen. So it's illegal to import them, but they would, if they were to turn up, they'd have significant impacts on sort of our current aquaculture businesses. So people farming blue mussels, but it could also, they grow very big. So these things can get up to about this big. So they would actually, like if we got a population along some of the piers, they potentially might take up, you know, the entire pier, and you'll have very limited space for our native species to grow. The other one, which is a resiny type one, which has a really sharp curve in it, this one is Asian green mussel. This is actually a tropical species, so it's not likely to be able to survive. It may survive, but it probably wouldn't actually create any sort of significant population here in Victoria. But because we work nationally, like we work with Queensland, we work with WA, we work in Northern Territory, and we have an expectation that if they were to find a pest that would be of concern to us, then they would manage that pest. Similarly, if we were to find a vessel that came into port with Asian green mussels on it, we would make sure that that vessel got clean, just in case it was going to Brisbane next. So probably not a massive issue for us, but we're doing the good neighbour type work, so that we're protecting our northern friends. So that's biofouling. That's the biofouling. We do have another species here, which is our Asian shore crab. This one turned up, or we got notified on this through the iNaturalist app, actually. Somebody took a photo of it and said, oh, that's actually probably a bad crab, so let's report that. So we found it, we got told about it in 2020. We've got a pretty good population around Point Cook on the other side of the bay. Down the eastern part of the bay, there's some sort of sporadic populations. They're an intertidal species. Thank you. They're an intertidal species, so they love living in rocky intertidal underneath boulders and little rubble and all that sort of stuff. So probably wouldn't find them around here because there's no sort of suitable habitat. But around Mornington's that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Mornington, Mount Martha, all that sort of stuff. That's where you'd probably find them. So we found them in 2018. We actually went back and did some more. Sort of looked at historical DNA that had been collected in the Port of Melbourne. So DNA, we use DNA for our molecular testing in our surveillance programs. So what we can do is we can take water samples, or we can put a structure in the water that allows species to grow on it, and then we can extract the DNA from all those species and actually work out what things have turned up. So the good thing about DNA is it will last forever, basically. If you store it correctly, it will last forever. So we actually went back to the Commonwealth Government and said, we've got this crab, and they had some DNA from back in 2017, and they said, well, why don't we test it for this Asian shore crab and see if it was around then. And lo and behold, it turned up in the analysis in 2017. So judging by the amount of DNA that was actually in those samples, it had probably been here since about 2015. So that really sort of kicked us into gear to really do events like this where we can sort of raise awareness about marine biosecurity and get people just to have a bit of an understanding about what is in their patch and what should not be in their patch. Undaria. This thing, again, similarly, we got two of the worst ones that we could have from Tasmania in the mid-90s. So this thing came across from Tasmania as biofouling. This is Undaria. This is it's edible, wakame, so seaweed salad that you get at your sushi places. Really quite nice. You can actually pull it out of the bay, and apparently you need to soak it in water. There's ways to do it. I'm not going to tell you how to get this ready to eat, but it's pretty good. It's pretty tasty. These things are a significant failure. They're not as bad as we once thought they were. They're on the list of 100 worst invasive species. There's an IUCN list, a red list. They're on the list of the world's worst 100 invasive species. But we're not really sort of finding it to be quite as bad as what everyone's saying that it is. It will create algal cover in areas where that was devoid of algal cover before, but we're not sort of seeing that it's out competing or taking over everything. And there's actually been quite a bit of work on looking at invertebrate communities underneath the canopies of Undaria, and particularly over in New Zealand. There's been quite a bit of work for that. It is still listed like nationally significant pest species, and a lot of work actually happens. It produces spores. So this little frilly bit at the bottom here, this little frilly bit is called the sporophyll, and in there it produces millions and millions of spores. And then when conditions are right, it will release those spores. They will find a new place to live. And then, yeah, the Victoria National Parks Association got some money through the Port Phillip Bay Fund to set up an underwater weeding project. And that was about getting the dive community to go and learn how to identify undaria, learn how to remove undaria safely. European fanworm, Sabella spallanzanii, I believe it is. Quite a pretty little thing, probably about this big. The fan might be, a little bit smaller than your fist, potentially. I'm not entirely sure when this thing turned up, but basically what it does, these are all little filter, it's a filter feeder. So it puts its little sort of feeding arms out, and it catches things and then brings it back in and eats it. So you can get really significant populations of these where you've just got like a carpet of little arms catching food. So if you think you're a native species and you're a little mussel and you're living there and you're going, oh, I've got lots of food, but then all of a sudden you've got 300 arms grabbing the food before it gets a chance to get down to you, then it may have potentially an impact on how much food you can eat. So that's the impact that thing has. There's also been a bit of work about the nitrogen cycle in the water as well. So they can actually affect how nitrogen goes through the system in a marine environment. But that's deep science, which I'm not really going to go into. So one of the things when something turns up as new, other species take a while to actually get their head around what that new species is. Really good example of that is Northern Pacific sea star. Deakin Uni did a study back in, I'm not even going to try and guess the date, but it was a while ago now. They were looking at scallops. So we had a big scallop fishery here in Port Phillip Bay. It was a commercial scallop fishery and it got closed quite a few years ago. They looked at a predator-prey relationship between Northern Pacific sea stars and scallops. And what they found is if they put a scallop in a tank with an 11-armed sea star, they would get out of there. They would get away from the sea star as quickly as they possibly could, because they would smell that sea star and say, that's a predator, that's going to come and eat me. The scallops with the Northern Pacific sea star had no idea, that they didn't recognise that as a predator. So they would just sit there and get eaten by the Northern Pacific sea star. They redid that test a few times, like over a couple of years, and they've now actually found that the scallops in the bay have actually learnt that Northern Pacific sea stars are a nasty thing. Put one in a tank with a scallop and the scallop will bail. It's learnt that, that's not a good thing. So similarly, things might not have actually worked out that, oh, that's a new crab species, so I can go and eat that. So they're kind of the pests that we're looking for. So some of the other things that we do, so we've got a surveillance program. As I mentioned, we've in all our commercial ports. So we've got the Port of Melbourne, we've got Western Port, we've got Corner Inlet, and we've also got down in Portland these days. So we're sort of looking, that's that early identification type work. But the work that we're doing here today is really about sort of raising awareness about what we've got out there in the bay. And if you do see something a bit weird, we'll talk about how to do the reporting in just a little bit once we get back. So pretty much anything that looks a bit sus, we ask people to come and report to us, because we prefer to get 1,000 reports of native species and provide some information on those native species rather than somebody not report that one marine pest that we get. And we get people saying they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel confident about what they're reporting, and we're more than happy, like I just said, send us whatever you reckon is a bit sus and we can provide you with some information about what you're actually looking at.
That was such an important session, and honestly, just a reminder that ocean conservation sometimes isn't about big global actions, but actually just about things we can do on our day-to-day. If you dive or snorkel in Victoria, knowing how to identify and report marine pests can go a long way in protecting the environments that we love. And if you found this useful, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more ocean-related content. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the water!